Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
Page 653. We had Holocaust Remembrance Day, plus it's Earth Day, so this is kind of a nice combination song. We're at the bottom of the page.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Do we need to adjust anything? I keep hearing a little bit of something.
Feedback.
You got it? Okay, feedback, that's what it's called. I keep forgetting words today. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. We are just delighted to have everybody with us to celebrate Shabbat this evening. And we're also celebrating Earth Day. And we're celebrating Earth Day throughout this Shabbat with special readings, with special Torah study tomorrow, and also with a tag talk from Ben Adams this evening at the end of the service. And I think I see him coming in right now. And what I also want us to think about before we enter Shabbat is to make sure that this is a day of learning, that this is a day of celebration, and that it is a day that leads to action, that it's something that where we consider what we can do to fight climate change, to pursue climate justice. And there's a saying that a podcast I listen to, they say all the time, which is the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, the second best time is now. So whenever I learn something that I probably should have been doing 20 years ago, and I've just been able to start doing now, I have to say that to myself because it still makes a difference even if you start today. So we are going to take a moment to welcome Shabbat and welcome each other. Please turn to someone beside you and behind you and wish them Shabbat Shalom. Our service continues on page 121, and we invite Jean Ettinger to bless our Shabbat lights. You're going to read this and then you'll light the candles.
Okay. Just in English?
This one, yes, in English.
The source of light and truth, creator of the eternal law of goodness, help us to fight knowledge by which to live. Lead us to take the words we shall speak into our hearts and our lives. Bless all who enter this sanctuary in need, all who bring the offerings of their hearts. May our worship lead us to acts of kindness, peace, and love.
And let's turn to page 142.
Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharek, Malachei Hayom, Melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Odem Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Hayom, Melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruni Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Hayom, Melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tzeitichem l'shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Hayom, Melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
To page 138. We'll be doing 1, 2, 5, and 9, and when we get to 9, we rise and we face the west. We don't have a window there, but we can picture the sun setting eventually and Shabbat arriving, but we can also remember all of those who came before us as we face that way too.
We need a sunset painting right there.
That's right, we
Yeah.
need a sunset painting. Yeah, a lot of temples say, go, look to the door where the entrance is, but we're actually supposed to look to the west, and when we used to look to the door when the entrance is, invariably somebody would be coming in and go like, oops. So,
I always said that's the Sabbath bride for the week.
exactly.
Lecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad, Yishmi'anu el hayuchad. Adonai echad v'shemo echad, l'shem u'tiferet v'litehila. Lecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Likrat Shabbat lechu b'necha, ki bekor haberacha, merosh mikedem nesucha, sof ma'aseh b'machashava techila. Lecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Hitoreri, hitoreri, hivarech kumimori, uri, uri, shir daberi, kevod Adonai, alayich nigla, boi v'shalom, at veret ba'ala, gam b'simcha u'b'tzola, tov ramonei, am sekula, bo v'chala, lecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat
Page 127. We pray responsively. There are days when we seek things for ourselves and measure failure by what we do not gain. On Shabbat, we seek not to acquire, but to share. There are days when we exploit nature as if it were a horn of plenty that can never be exhausted. On Shabbat, we stand in wonder before the mystery of creation. There are days when we act as if we cared nothing for the rights of others. On Shabbat, we remember that justice is our duty and a better world our goal. So we embrace Shabbat, day of rest, day of wonder, day of peace. Page 264, we rise in body and in spirit for the Baruch Hu.
Baruch Hu et Adonai,
Now I'd like to invite up reader number 1, Lisa Toll. You raised your hand first.
Creator, artist, author of the world, what joy to sense the seasons' turns, the colors change, the flowers bloom, the trees hum, the music of birds, the caress of the winds, the stories of clouds. The beauty of your world makes my own spirit dance as I watch time passing. I know that you are eternal, the center of life, the creator of all things, and I know that there is beauty far beyond my imaginings, and that all of us, your children, your creatures, your plantings, live to honor you and sing your praise with every breath. God saw all that had been made and beheld it was very good. See to it that you do not spoil and destroy my world, for if you do, there will be no one else to repair it.
Baruch atah Adonai hama'ariv aravim. In each age we receive and transmit Torah. At each moment we are addressed by the world. In each age we are challenged by our ancient teaching. At each moment we stand face to face with truth. In each age we add our wisdom to that which has gone before. At each moment the knowing heart is filled with wonder. In each age the children of Torah become its builders and seek to set the world firm on a foundation of truth. Baruch atah Adonai, Ohev Amo Yisrael.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Le'olam Vaed.
You may be seated.
בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודך והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבבך ושינתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם לאות על ידך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם אדוני אלוהיכם אמת.
We worship the power that unites the universe, a promise of harmony for all. Yet that oneness eludes our grasp as imperfection and evil abound. Before our eyes there is a vision of perfection, order, and goodness. There is evil enough to break the heart, and there is good enough to exalt the soul. When will redemption come? When we grant everyone what we claim for ourselves. Long ago we escaped the tyranny of Egypt. Our people saw the power of the Most High. We learned God's presence redeems time and event. So we celebrate this power that makes for freedom. Understanding among us, let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Adonai Eloheinu, Hashkivenu, shalom. Lehamidenu, shomreinu lechaim. Ufros aleinu, sukat shlomecha. Let there be love, understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms.
Shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. B'nei Yisrael, oti le'olam. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Ki sheshet yamim asah Adonai, Adonai, et ha-shamayim ve'et ha'aretz. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. U'bayom hashvi Shabbat vayinafash, Shabbat vayinafash, Shabbat vayinafash. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam.
Page 273, we rise in body and in spirit for the tefillah.
Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzhak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el HaGadol, HaGibor, HaNorah, El Hayom, וקונה הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל אתה רב להושיע, מוריד הטל, מחכה חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומידה מלך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה להחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיה הכל. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הקדוש.
You may be seated. Page 277. You set aside the seventh day for your name, the pinnacle of creation, and you blessed it above all other days, more sacred than all festival times. So it is written in your Torah. The heaven and the earth were finished and all their array. On the seventh day, God had completed the work that had been done. Ceasing then on the seventh day from all the work that God had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, and ceased from all the creative work that God had chosen to do. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh hashabbat. We continue on page 280. For the good in us which calls us to a better life, we give thanks. For the strength to improve the world with our hearts and our hands, we offer praise. For the desire in us which leads us to work for peace, we are grateful. For life and nature, harmony and beauty, for the hope of tomorrow, all praise to the source of being.
Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcha, ulecha na'el lehodot. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Ki hatov melech adon lechol hashalom. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. V'tov be'enecha levarech et Amcha Yisrael b'chol עת ובכל שעה בשלומך. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Tasim Leolam. Tasim Leolam.
Renee, would you like to come up and do your reading? Renee? It's your turn. That's okay. I was trying to get your attention.
Master of the universe, grant me the ability not to be alone. May it be my custom to go outdoors each day, among the trees and the grasses, among all growing things, and there may I be alone, and enter into prayer to talk with the one that I belong to. Know that every shepherd and shepherdess has a unique nigun melody for each of the grasses and for each place where they herd. For each and every grass has its own song, and from these songs of the grasses, the shepherds composed their songs. By Rabbi Nachman.
Please take a moment for silent prayer.
Shalom v'roma, v'yaseh shalom aleinu. Oseh shalom v'roma, v'yaseh shalom aleinu. Oseh shalom v'roma, v'yaseh shalom aleinu. Yaseh shalom. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'achol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, shalom, shalom.
Ose shalom bimroma, uyase shalom aleinu. Ose shalom bimroma, uyase shalom aleinu. Ose shalom bimroma, uyase shalom aleinu. Yase shalom, yase shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yase shalom, yase shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol yoshvei tevel.
We pause in the heart of our service to offer a prayer for those in our community who are ill. This week we are thinking of David Harrison, Barry Cohen, Joe Crinty, Rita Siegel, Stephen Witt, Jerry Klebanoff, Sylvia Fishbein, Ruth Cohen, Marjorie Backup, Angela Barry, Alex Denon, Eric Schwartz, Richard Oder, Matt Schaefer, Richard Barry Perlman, Paul Friedman, Chuck Katz, Lynn Katz, and Heather Miller. If you'd like to add a name to this list, please do so now.
Cheryl Blumenthal, Judy Lascotti, Pat Button.
Thank you. What? Oh, you're back. Yes. Always praying for everyone in the room as well and all of our loved ones. We join in a prayer of healing on page 371.
To make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mishabero imotenu mekor habracha. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
And just as we share life's difficulties, we also share life's joys. If anyone is, I know some of you are, I know somebody's celebrating a birthday today. Some people are celebrating birthdays, anniversaries, children visiting, new grandchildren. No joy is too small. We need them all. So is anybody celebrating anything today? Yes. It is your birthday. Yes. Wonderful. Yeah. Yes. Oh, that's wonderful. Yes, and you may remember we saw Nefesh Mountain on Simchat Torah of 2020. There was a joint online concert for all of us who were. I remember watching it like from the sofa. So yeah, it's great to be able to see them live. That must have been a real celebration. Yes, and Gary and I talked about this. I went to college with their rabbi, so it's always the whole world's connected. Other things, yes, Joel. Your granddaughter turned 20. Admeva Esrim, wonderful, mazel tov. Yes, Linda. Oh, wow. Yeah. Yes, yes, there is such a power in community, and we're blessed to be a part of it. And we always also want to make sure that our community is a jumping off point from which we pursue justice and care for the vulnerable. So that's a good example of all of those things. All right, any other joys? Yes, Alan. Alan and then Jean.
A couple weeks ago, we were in Texas for a family event. Wonderful, happy. On the way home, our flight was canceled or postponed. And so we were in the airport having dinner, a little bummed out. And I was sitting across from each other having dinner. And there was a young woman at the next table, and we started up a conversation with her. And we chatted for a while, never even found out her name. She didn't find out ours. We had a very pleasant conversation. She left before us and finished. And when we were done with dinner, and I called the waitress over to get the check, the waitress said, the lady that was sitting next to you paid your bill.
Oh, that's so nice. Such a nice act of kindness. Wonderful. Yeah. Okay, Jean, last one. Oh, wonderful. Yeah. That's wonderful. Wow. Can't believe they go abroad their first semester. Yes. Wonderful. So we are going to continue with our service because Ben's going to be speaking at the end. But I'm going to invite Robin, who's our next reader, to share a blessing, share a reading.
A prayer for the planet. Master of the universe, in whose hand is the breath of all life and the soul of every person, grant us the gift of Shabbat, a day of rest from all our labors. With our senses may we perceive the glory of your works. Fill us with your goodness, that we may attest to your great deeds. Strengthen us to become your faithful partners, preserving the world for the sake of future generations. Adonai, our God of our ancestors, may it be your will to renew your blessing of the world in our day, as you have done from the beginning of time. By Rabbi Daniel Nevins.
Thank you. We turn to page 586 at the bottom, and we rise in body and in spirit for Aleinu.
Aleinu l'shabeach l'Adon.
שלא עשנו כגוי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגר עלינו ככל המולד, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסר הארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינת עוזה ושכינת עוזה וכופי מרומים. הוא אלוהינו ואינו אמת מלכנו וחסולתו, חגגו בתורתו, בדעת היום בחשבותו אל לבביך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל, בארץ מתחת עינות ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
You may be seated. Our thoughts turn to those who have departed this earth, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every race and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and death. This week we mourn the recent passings of Margie Jacobs, mother of Eve Jacobs, Theodora Johnson, sister-in-law of Shari Johnson, Professor Richard H. McKinstry, father of Betsy McKinstry, Wendy Stacey, friend of Michael Levin. We are also observing the yahrzeits of Benjamin Chernoff, father of Michael Chernoff, Natalie Finberg Friedman, mother of Ellen Friedman, Thomas Guerin, father of Gail Guerin, Edith Gershenson, mother of Ellen Gershenson, Irma Kaufman, aunt of Robin Rivkin, Mel Kellerman, uncle of Elaine Gershenson, Audrey Conweiser, mother of Jean Ettinger, Agnes Law, great-aunt of Michael Levin, Mary Longer, mother of Rhea Applebaum, Blanche Muchnick, mother of Nancy Miller, Anne Sklar, grandmother of Anthony Shore, Joseph Stein, grandfather of Susan Holan, Elaine Witt, mother of Carol and Stephen Witt, and Gail Zitten, beloved member of our congregation. If you'd like to add a name to this list, please do so now. We turn to page 598 and we rise. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei rabbah, be'alma divarach hirutei v'yamelich malchutei, b'chayechon u'v'yomechon v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, b'gala u'v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mivarach le'olam u'almei almaya, Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei dekudesha b'richu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav, hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, v'imru. Amen. May the source of peace send peace to all who mourn and comfort to all who are bereaved, and let us say, Amen. You may be seated. Page 123.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu b'shabbat kasha v'ahava u'razon inchilanu zikaron lema'aseh v'reishit ki hu yom tehillah l'mikra'e kodesh zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim kivanu v'acharta v'tanu kidashta mikol ha'amim v'shabbat kodshecha v'yahava u'razon kinchaltanu Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh hashabbat.
L'chaim.
Chaim.
I think that's actually real wine.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz b'te'avon.
Speaking of real wine, tomorrow at 5 o'clock?
5 o'clock?
Tomorrow at 5 o'clock in here, we're going to have a martini havdalah, which I heard used to be like a big thing, and I haven't ever been to one, so I'm very excited. There will be snacks. It's bringing your own drinks, and the any wine needs to be certified kosher, but any other kind of alcohol or beverage just needs to not have pork in it. So, but we're very strict about the wine. So we're really looking forward to having people join us. And then on Sunday, we have Mitzvah Day, and there are several projects you can be involved in all over the community, including the Loka is cleaning up the Har Nebo Cemetery. And I know that if you go to the website to sign up for Mitzvah Day at this point, they'll tell you that registration is closed, but that just means you won't get a T-shirt. So please still come to whatever you were planning to come to, right? I think there are also extra T-shirts, but I think the registration is closed refers to you might not get a T-shirt. So you shouldn't come and help people, because there's always room for that. Yes. High School Park. Oh, also High School Park. We're going to be 10 o'clock cleaning up there. So that's wonderful. Yes, Lisa. Okay, so Jewish Relief Agent, for this week or just in general? For this week. So if you are somebody who likes to drive and has a really good GPS, you might want to go help Jewish Relief Agency this weekend. If you're somebody, somebody was saying today that this was a good way for their kid to learn to drive, though that's like the advanced class of your kid learning to drive. Yes, we have The next session of our social justice class on Tuesday. It's online. If you missed the first one, you can still join us. We'd love to have you. We're going to be talking about we're going to be talking about from welfare to work. So seeing how the rabbis saw work versus receiving some kind of assistance, and when those things came into conflict. And then anything else?
The student choir will be singing next week. They're always wonderful.
Yes, and we also have somebody coming to speak about their Litaken experience in Washington. So we will have lots of wonderful things next. Our experience of social justice advocacy for teens. Yes, what shall we sing as a transitional song?
So let's turn to page 652. We're at the top of the page. And I always love reading this translation as you're turning. You and I will change the world, you and I. Then all will join us. Though it's been said before, it doesn't matter. You and I will change the world. You and I will start from the beginning. It may be difficult, but it doesn't matter. It's like what you were saying, Rabbi, something that should have been done 20 years ago, we can still do it today, right?
Mm-hmm.
אני ואתה נשנה את העולם. אני ואתה אז יבואו כבר כולם. אמרו את זה קודם לפניי, זה לא משנה. אני ואתה נשנה את העולם. אני ואתה ננסה מההתחלה. יהיה לנו רע, אין דבר זה לא נורא. אמרו את זה קודם לפניי, זה לא משנה. אני ואתה נשנה את העולם.
Baruch atem b'vo'echem, baruch atem b'tzeitchem. Blessed were you when you came into the house of God. Blessed may you be as you go forth. God, we are so grateful for this creation, for the creation of this world that we now live in. Help us to be good stewards of our environment. Help us to pursue justice for the planet and not just for the people who live on it. And let us say, Amen.
May God bless you and protect you. May God's countenance shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May God turn to you in blessing. May God turn to you in blessing and give you peace. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Yaher Adonai panav elecha v'choneka. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, hey, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat shalom.
Well, Shabbat shalom, everybody. We are delighted to have one of our signature now, thanks to Linda George, our signature tag talks, which stands for Torah, Avodah, and Gimilut Chasadim, learning, service, and acts of loving kindness. And it's our own version of the TED Talk. And we get to hear wonderful things about our congregants. And I can tell from the numbers we get when we have one that this is something that people really appreciate and enjoy. And I'm especially grateful to Ben Adams for speaking this evening, because I didn't have to give a sermon about leprosy, which would have been which is what the Torah portion was about. And because of Earth Day, I don't have to do text study about it tomorrow, so I get to skip a whole year of leprosy. Anyway, but we are delighted to have Ben Adams speaking with us tonight about sustainability. He has served diligently as a leader in our community and even as president, which hopefully part of your tag talk is to say how wonderful it is to be president of this congregation. And we're delighted to welcome him here this evening.
Thank you, Rabbi. And I'm pleased to be talking to you tonight about leprosy. Oh, that's not what I was supposed to talk about? And thank you for that last song, because incredibly appropriate, and it's a song that we know very well from movement days and from living in Israel. It's very emotional, actually, so it was a great introduction. And thank you for inviting me to speak here on Erev, Earth Day. So as you may know, my work revolves around the sustainability of buildings. What you may not know is that in the USA, residential and commercial buildings together consume more energy than any other sector, more than industry, and more even than transportation. And buildings generate almost as much greenhouse gas as all of transportation combined. That's cars, trucks, trains, planes, and shipping. So we're talking about the importance of buildings tonight. And in preparation for this talk, I recently asked one of my colleagues, why don't we make a bigger deal about Earth Day in our firm? And they replied without missing a beat, because for us, every day is Earth Day. And I thought, that's true. In fact, for me, it's really been that case for all of my 34 years of my career in this country. But here's the thing, I can honestly say there's never been a more interesting and exciting time to be doing what I do. Because for the longest time, those of us in the so-called green building world felt like each day we were pushing a rock up a hill. And now suddenly, in just the last couple of years, that's not the case. So what's changed? I would point to a convergence of four things. Firstly, a general acceptance that climate change is real. It's happening now, and we need to do something about it. People are either seeing it in the news every day, or they are the news. We've reached a maturity in our understanding. Secondly, we've reached a maturity in our understanding of how buildings work. Not the individual components, but the buildings holistically as a system. Thirdly, advancements in technology, and I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. And fourthly, a willingness to invest public money in doing the right thing, especially for those who need it most. But first, I'd like to go back to the beginning, more or less. So my work in sustainability revolves around what we now call building science. In many ways, I'm fortunate that the arc of my career pretty much follows the arc of the field itself. In 1981, I should say, I was recruited out of university in New Zealand, where I know you all know I grew up, to join a new group forming at the Ministry of Energy, the equivalent of the Department of Energy here, the DOE. A small group that would be dedicated to the concept of energy conservation. Like America, New Zealand desperately needed to reduce its dependence on foreign oil. And until that time, it was assumed that if you wanted to get people to use less of something, all you had to do was what? Put the price up. But that doesn't work so well when people need to drive to work, heat their homes, and plug in their appliances. Fortunately, some novel ideas were coming out of America at the time. For example, something called an energy audit, a protocol for walking around a building looking for low-hanging energy savings. The heater on for 24 hours a day when it only needs to be on for 8 hours a day. the leaking steam pipe that no one had bothered to fix. And energy education, the notion that if you help people understand how they are using their energy and how it correlates with cost, people will make better informed decisions. We were a group of just half a dozen energy progressives within an otherwise stodgy and out-of-date energy economics group, and we were breaking new ground. At least that's how we saw it. This work appealed to me on so many levels, not the least of which being a strong connection to the Jewish values of Shmirat Adamah, protecting the environment, and Tikkun Olam, repairing the world. But even within New Zealand's tiny and far-flying Jewish community, I had grown up in a youth movement allied with the kibbutz system. I had spent time in Israel, and it too was tugging at me. Thus began an interlude of some 7 years, during which I helped start a kibbutz in the Galilee, met Gail, served in the army, got married, and we had our first child. And then, in 1989, I found myself back here in Philadelphia, the home of Gail's family, quickly picking up where I had left off in a career that had started half a world away. But a change was evolving that would change everything that came after. Instead of talking about energy conservation, we were talking about energy efficiency, particularly as it related to the homes we live in and the buildings we work in. Okay, so what's the difference, you ask? Turns out the difference is the difference between Jimmy Carter and Barack Obama. We have many things to thank Jimmy Carter for, especially right now as he nears the end of his life. But one of them is not the fireside chat he gave on television on February 22nd, 1977. Anyone remember it? No? There he was, in his thick woolly sweater, telling the good people, the good citizens of America and the world really, that people had to learn to use less energy by setting their thermostats to 65 degrees. Now, some of you may set your thermostat to 65 degrees in winter, but most people are not happy in their home at 65, and that was especially true in the 1970s. The whole image, the 65, the woolly sweater, the chair up close to the fire, sent a single message loud and clear, and one that took us almost the next 2 decades to recover from, that energy conservation meant sacrifice, going without, and being uncomfortable. A message that had in fact been enshrined 2 years earlier in the Energy Policy and Conservation Act of 1975. By contrast, the next major update, the Energy Policy Act of 1992, talked not about energy conservation, but energy efficiency. So again, what's the difference? Efficiency is doing more with less, being comfortable, even more comfortable than you were before, while saving energy. How is this possible? Okay, so consider this. Before the 1980s, there were no energy codes for the buildings we live in. A code establishes the minimum standard for how something is to be built. Structural codes have been around for more than a century, mostly focused on life safety. And actually, the oldest example of a building code, anybody know where the oldest example of a building code can be found? Here? Well, yes, kind of. In our very own Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, in Deuteronomy, where it requires that parapets be built on rooftops so that people don't fall off. First building code. So, not having an energy code meant that millions of homes have been built with little or no regard for energy performance. Those homes were getting older, and as energy costs rose in the 80s and 90s, there was a growing realization that those most impacted by inefficient houses were low-income households with the least ability to pay for public utilities. This realization gave birth to the notion of energy burden, that housing affordability is equal to the cost of the structure, the mortgage or the rent, plus the utility bill, because being able to pay your utility bill is essential to living in a home, and to doing so while being comfortable and healthy. So, through the 90s, we focused on improving the energy performance of low-income homes with the support of funding from federal and utility programs. In doing so, we learned a lot about how houses actually work, how air, heat, and moisture move through the structure, how replacing windows helps, yes, but not as much as air sealing and insulating an old home at the top, the attic, and the bottom, the foundation. We learned how to test, measure, and model energy performance so we could be sure we were having the intended impact. And we learned how not to make people sick or worse. And we learned about mold and asthma and carbon monoxide and the toll they take, especially on low-income families. We took these learnings and applied them to new construction. We built them into an energy code with regular technical updates through the 90s and early 2000s. But the real innovation was happening through voluntary above-code certification programs like Energy Star, LEED, and Passive House. In many states, these programs were supported by incentives funded by requirements for utilities to meet a portion of their energy supply obligation through efficiency initiatives, even allowing utilities to sell savings back into the grid like generation. This is the concept of the negawatt, or a negative kilowatt. Today, more than 2 million homes have been built to Energy Star or higher standards. Now, voluntary programs are fine, but they're really intended to prepare and move the market toward higher and higher levels of performance. And this is why I mentioned Barack Obama. Because what he did as part of his response to the 2008 financial meltdown was make general funding to states to help recover from the meltdown, funds from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, contingent on raising the performance level of state energy codes every 3 years from that point forward. This was a wonky move that got the attention of absolutely no one, except people like me. But it's had a real and tangible long-term impact on every new home built since. Together with accelerated appliance standards and advances in technology, the combined result has been astounding. Overall, residential energy consumption in the US actually fell through the 2000s and 2010s, even as average house size increased. Think about that. In affordable housing especially, programs like the Federal Low-Income Housing Tax Credit and funders like Enterprise Green Communities have driven us to remarkable levels of performance. Some of our most exciting projects include a multifamily building just across the river in New Jersey for low-income seniors that actually generates zero utility costs to its residents, guaranteed. It can do that because the extremely low energy use is entirely met by solar panels on the roof. And another one, there's a mixed income apartment building that you pass by at Temple train station when you take the train from Elkins Park into town, the building that actually runs along the station platform. That's a mixed income community with a combination of very low energy usage, a green roof, a solar roof, and even a blue roof, meaning its storm water is held there and controlled for release later. So, when I started, green or sustainable were considered esoteric, expensive, and for sure highly suspect. In the generally conservative construction community, we didn't talk in terms of green, and we certainly didn't talk in terms of climate change. Today, the climate has changed for all to see, and few people question the link with carbon emissions. So that brings me to the revolution that's coming to your basement. We're in the midst of a paradigm shift. For 3 decades, focusing on energy affordability also meant that we focused on moving homes from the most expensive, least efficient, and dirtiest fuel, electricity, to the more efficient, lower cost, and relatively cleaner fuel, natural gas. Today, all those metrics have been flipped. Thanks to a new generation of heat pump space and water heaters, we can shift from generating heat much as our ancestors who lived in caves did, over an open flame, to generating comfort by moving heat that is already present in the air around us, and the water, by the way. It's kind of like from analog to electrons. At much the same cost, and with dramatically few or even zero carbon emissions. Every day, I'm greeted with a new opportunity to try something new. Not just technologies, but also new solutions for equity of access. For example, experimenting with new economic models to ensure that the cost of this transition isn't simply shifted to the shoulders of those who can least afford to pay. We have to avoid that. Of course, most people want to talk to me about putting solar on their roof. Or they ask me what's the most cost-effective replacement heating and air conditioning system they should put in their home, considering they probably won't be living there much longer. I get this question all the time. But I forewarn you, if you ask me those questions, you may not get the answer you want to hear. Because solar is almost never the first thing you should do. Putting solar panels on a leaky, inefficient home with old, inefficient appliances is a waste of good, clean, and expensive kilowatts, and it almost certainly won't make you any more comfortable. And when you next replace the gas or oil system in your basement, remember this: your choice will lock in the carbon profile of that home for the next 20 to 30 years. So let me conclude this with this thought. Be open to change. These new electric systems may not look and feel just like your current heating and cooling system, and you may interact with them differently. But this is your opportunity to do yourself, the next family to move in, and the planet a favor. Fortunately, the recent Inflation Reduction Act, back to the politics, I guess, has rebates and incentives that will be available later this year to help people make the choice a financially feasible one. Which brings me to my last point about a willingness to invest public money into doing the right thing. So, if you're interested in what happened to Stacey Abrams, the two-time contender for governor of Georgia, anybody know what she's doing now? Huh? I couldn't hear. No. Well, maybe she is. She probably is. I mean, they all do, right? But she recently joined an organization called Rewiring America to help bring the electrification message to everyone, including those who need it most. This is a big deal. Rewiring America, by the way, has an online tool that you can use to figure out how to take advantage of some of this funding that's coming for your own home. So just Google Rewiring America, and it's the first thing that'll pop up. Okay, so that's my prepared comments. I'm happy to talk about this more at any time if anybody wants to get in touch, but I'm also happy to have a bit of a discussion or answer any questions. You must have questions. So I was trying to think about the Jewish connection here. And you heard a little bit in there, but there's another Jewish connection, which is that my favorite activity at conferences and symposiums and other places like that is to bagel people. Do you know what bageling is? When you kind of drop a hint to figure out if they're Jewish or not. You know, you mention a bar mitzvah or, you know, what you're doing for Pesach. And it's amazing to me how many Jewish people there are in this industry that I'm in. They're everywhere, and I'd like to think that has something to do with the connection with Jewish values and education and care for the planet. But it's very funny when you realize that somebody you've known or worked with for 10 years, and then suddenly you find out that they're also Jewish. It happens all the time. Anyway, Karen, did you have a question? Yeah. Okay. So if you have a gas water heater now, or an electric water heater, the new option that's now available is a heat pump water heater. And as I said, the easiest way to think about a heat pump is that it is making use of the heat that's already in the environment. The other way to think about it is it's an air conditioner in reverse. It's just really the last few years that heat pump water heaters have become available at a commercially competitive price. You need an HVAC contractor or a plumber who knows how to select them properly and how to install them and where to install them. But it's what we'll be doing next. The added benefit is that it actually provides a certain amount of dehumidification in your basement because, like I said, it works like an air conditioner. And it's the water heating equivalent of a heat pump for your space heating and cooling, right? So a heat pump for your space heating and cooling is basically the same configuration as the central air conditioner you have now, only it runs in both directions. In summer, it functions as an air conditioner, and in winter, it's run in reverse, and it provides the heat. All that heat that you feel outside in the summer, that it's drawn out of your home and it's blowing outside, it's basically doing the reverse in the winter and putting the heat back in the house. And now there are new, what are called mini-split versions of heat pumps. It's what you see everywhere in Europe or in Israel, on the wall inside the house with a unit on the outside that hangs on the side. But there are lots of different variations and configurations to make it suitable for the kinds of homes that we all have. And this is what the rebates and tax credits and incentives are going to come through for towards the end of this year. That is a great question. So actually the majority of the work that we do is for affordable multifamily housing where the residents are renters. So the question was, how does this work for renters? And the answer is it works for renters by incentivizing the property owners and the property managers to make the transition. And so there are many programs that we're involved with that do that for existing multifamily buildings, because the people who live in rental apartments don't get to choose what kind of system they have. And it breaks my heart when I see the number of properties that are out there that have old, inefficient, uncomfortable systems, or that have electric resistance furnaces, which are the absolute most expensive heating method you can use, or the tall apartment buildings, like in New York, but also here in Philly, with our favorite temperature control mechanism, the window stat. At the top of everyone at the top of the building is opening their windows because it's too hot and they can't control the heat, and everybody at the bottom is cold. These are the realities of the housing stock that we have. And so the solutions that we work on every day is not just creating a new a retrofit scenario for the technical fix, but for the comfort fix as well. And it lowers the cost to the resident. Yep.
You go to the east, it's pristine. Every floor is pristine. You go to the east, the west is called the slum. That's how bad it is.
Yep.
And it's shameful that these owned by the same company, they can't even keep them at the same level. And I have to budget all year for the air conditioning in the summer because it raises the utility.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is a complex issue, and it's one that is characterized by what we call the split incentive, which is that the motivation for the property owner is not aligned with the needs of the resident. The property owner who pays for the equipment to be in the building and would pay for it to be replaced with something new and more efficient is very often not the one paying the bill. So they don't get the savings generated by the new equipment. So we have a lot of solutions for this, and it's not a transition that will occur naturally, unfortunately. It needs stimulus, it needs incentives, it needs the public willingness to spend money for a public good, essentially. So this latest legislation will help with that. And the other thing that does help with it is in states that have progressive, reasonably progressive regulatory, utility regulatory bodies, like especially in New Jersey and New York, California, they mandate the utilities to spend money on these kinds of improvements, particularly for low-income customers. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen everywhere, but of course it's also a climate dependent issue, right? The issues in Wisconsin or even New York are not the same ones as in Florida, for example. So, there's a lot of different nuances to this that make federal mandates difficult, which is why the states have to drive it. But by the way, not to get too political, but during the last administration, it would have been very easy. You know what? It wasn't just easy to get depressed. People did. Our colleagues at the EPA, for example, had a very, very difficult time. But the good news is that the states were moving along anyway. And, most of the states that have the highest energy intensity, the highest energy use per capita, are putting enormous amounts of funding into meeting climate goals that will meet the international climate mitigation goals that we signed on to, Kyoto and others that we signed on to before the last administration. That's all happening. And that is why, among other reasons, why America's energy use is actually not accelerating at the rate you would expect it to. I was back in New Zealand a couple of weeks ago speaking to an old friend who is now the ratepayer advocate for New Zealand for energy. And we were talking energy policy, and you would say, wow, New Zealand, they must have really progressive energy and environmental policy. They don't. They have done very, very few of any of these things. Their building codes are terrible for energy. They know nothing about the concept of the negawatt and producing energy savings to offset supply side traditional supply. America, and I am saying this to help you feel better, because I think we like to get down on ourselves for how terrible a country we are in terms of our energy intensity. And there's truth to the fact that we have the highest energy intensity in the world, but the amount of improvement and the ongoing improvements are huge and dramatic, and they're going in the right direction. So, as we go into Earth Day tomorrow, it is something to take with you. And these are big changes. When we go out and we each do a small thing, it can feel, it feels good, but maybe not significant enough. It's like, how are we actually going to change the world? This is how we change the world. We change it with big policies, and we change it with big programs, and we change it with technology, and technology is making the difference now. So the other question you haven't asked me, but is the one that I get all the time, is, but what about the fact that electricity is, produced by coal in many states? And what about the fact that we may not have enough to power all these electric devices and the cars charging up and everything else? And all of that is true, but the trajectory of the electric grid is going in one direction only, and that is cleaner every day. And we know that the price of gas, natural gas, is going up. Last year, more heat pumps were sold in America for residential heating and cooling than any other technology. First time. So this is happening. It is moving in the right direction, and the grid has a lot of work to do to keep up, but it will. Not that there won't be some hiccups along the way. The other big technology that's going to make the difference in people's homes and businesses and other buildings is storage, meaning batteries, right? Because if we have more batteries in homes and in buildings, then we can store the power for when we need it and release it as the demand increases. The other thing that we're working on, that's being worked on, is kind of radical approaches to making existing buildings more efficient. So we actually are part of a demonstration in New York City based on a Dutch system called Energy Sprong. Not sure where that name came from, but this is designed to clad the exterior of buildings with insulation and air sealing to actually give them essentially another whole layer on the outside and improve the energy performance of the building all in one go. Now, when you take that to the kind of logical conclusion, you do that in Arizona, you do it on homes, and you pre-cool them at night, or, in the early part of the day when people are at work, so that by 4 o'clock when they're coming home, the air conditioning, it gets turned off, and the house coasts through the peak period until nighttime without putting any additional strain on the grid. And we've demonstrated already as an industry that you can do this. And why is this important? Because in the last few years, Arizona has been venting solar power off into nowhere because they've had too much of it at the wrong times. So we're just now starting to figure out how to get buildings to work in sync with these other kinds of renewable and carbon-free production. So, like I said, it's just, every day is more exciting than the last one, and I go to work every day in person or virtually with a huge amount of hope and feeling really good about where we're going. So I want, if you take anything away from this, take that away, because otherwise it can get a little too much. We're getting there, we really are. Robin?
Any news on incentives in Pennsylvania? Seems like they've been behind.
So the question was, are there incentives in Pennsylvania? It seems like we're a little behind. Yeah, it seems like Pennsylvania is a little behind because it is, unfortunately, especially compared with our nearest neighbor, New Jersey. So New Jersey has had I guess you would call it a progressive regulatory commission for utilities for several decades now. And Pennsylvania has been pushed along kind of kicking and screaming. There are incentives. The utilities have goals to meet to reduce energy consumption. Until this year, they mostly did it by providing free lighting upgrades and light bulbs. Those easy savings with LED lighting have all now evaporated because the market has, for the most part, not sure about here, but for the most part, has upgraded to LED lighting, and so those savings are gone. But anyway, to the question, Pennsylvania is a little behind. It doesn't have as much in the way of incentives. We're trying to change that. But the federal incentives, the money coming out of the Inflation Reduction Act, everything that's not tax credits is essentially cash that is getting pushed to the states. And every state is required to, actually I think it's voluntary, but every state needs to come up with their plan to say how they're going to disperse those funds. And that's what's being worked on right now. And that's why even though the legislation passed at the end of last year, you can't actually get a rebate or an incentive right now until the states have figured out how they're going to put it out there. If you go to that Rewiring America site and look it up, it'll tell you how much you'll be eligible for. It'll also tell you what's available now and what will be available later. But most of the, quote, cash incentives are not available yet, but they will be everywhere.
So I'm gonna recommend that we
Yeah.
continue our conversation over ONED, but this is really just
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. And to continue our Earth Day festivities tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., we'll be having our regular Shabbat morning service with a climate-themed Torah study. So we hope that you'll join us in the morning.